Old Li Wang, the peddler, who had lived in the land beyond the sea, was wont to declare, "For every cent that a man makes here, he can make 100 there." "Then, why," would ask Sankwei, "do you now have to move from door to fill your bowl with rice?" And the old man would sigh and answer, "Because where one learns how to make gold, one also learns how to lose it." "How to lose it?" echoed Wao Sankwei. "Tell me all about it." So the old man would tell stories about the winning and the losing, and the stories of the losing were even more fascinating than the stories of the winning. Yes, that was life, he would conclude. Life, life. At such times the boy would gaze across the water with wistful eyes. The land beyond the sea was calling to him. The place was a sleepy little south coast town where the years slipped by monotonously. The boy was the only son of the man who had been the town magistrate. Had his father lived, Wao Sankwei would have been sent to complete his schooling in another province. As it was, he did nothing but sleep, dream, and occasionally get into mischief. What else was there to do? His mother and sister waited upon him hand and foot. Was he not the son of the house? The family income was small, scarcely sufficient for their needs, but there was no way by which he could add to it, unless, indeed, he disgraced the name of Wao by becoming a common fisherman. The great green waves lifted white arms of foam to him, and the fishes gleaming and lurking in the waters seemed to beseech him to draw them from the deep, but his mother shook her head. "Should you become a fisherman," said she, "your family would lose face. Remember that your father was a magistrate." When he was about 19, there returned to the town one who had been absent for many years. Ching Qi, like old Li Wang, had also lived in the land beyond the sea, but unlike old Li Wang he had accumulated a small fortune. "'Tis a hard life over there," said he, "but 'tis worthwhile. At least one can be a man, and can work at what work comes his way without losing face." Then he laughed at Wao Sankwei's flabby muscles, at his soft, dark eyes, and plump, white hands. "If you lived in America," said he, "you would learn to be ashamed of such beauty." Whereupon Wao Sankwei made up his mind that he would go to America, the land beyond the sea. Better any life than that of a woman-man. He talked long and earnestly with his mother. "Give me your blessing," said he. "I will work and save money. What I send home will bring you many a comfort, and when I come back to China, it may be that I shall be able to complete my studies and obtain a degree. If not, my knowledge of the foreign language which I shall acquire will enable me to take a position which will not disgrace the name of Wao." His mother listened and thought. She was ambitious for her son whom she loved beyond all things on earth. Moreover, had not Ping, a Canton merchant, who had visited the little town 2 moons ago, declared to Hua, who traded in palm leaves, that the signs of the times were that the son of a cobbler, returned from America with the foreign language, could easier command a position of consequence than the son of a schoolteacher unacquainted with any tongue but that of his motherland? "Very well," she acquiesced, "but before you go I must find you a wife. Only your son, my son, can comfort me for your loss." 2. While Sankwei stood behind his desk, busily entering figures in a long yellow book. Now and then he would thrust the hair pencil with which he worked behind his ears and manipulate with deft fingers a Chinese counting machine. While Sankwei was the junior partner and bookkeeper of the firm of Liang Tangwao and Company of San Francisco. He had been in America 7 years and had made good use of his time. Self-improvement had been his object and ambition, even more than the acquirement of a fortune, and who, looking at his fine, intelligent face and listening to his careful English, could say that he had failed? One of his partners called his name. Some ladies wished to speak to him. while Sankwei hastened to the front of the store. One of his callers, a motherly-looking woman, was the friend who had taken him under her wing shortly after his arrival in America. She had come to invite him to spend the evening with her and her niece, the young girl who accompanied her. After his callers had left, Sankwei returned to his desk and worked steadily until the hour for his evening meal, which he took in the Chinese restaurant across the street from the bazaar. He hurried through with this, as before going to his friend's house, he had a somewhat important letter to write and mail. His mother had died a year before, and the uncle, to whom he was writing, had taken his wife and son into his home until such time as his nephew could send for them. Now the time had come. While Sankwei's memory of the woman who was his wife was very faint. How could it be otherwise? She had come to him but 3 weeks before the sailing of the vessel which had brought him to America, and until then he had not seen her face. But she was his wife and the mother of his son. Ever since he had worked in America he had sent money for her support, and she had proved a good daughter to his mother. As he sat down to write he decided that he would welcome her with a big dinner to his countrymen. "Yes," he replied to Mrs. Dean, "later on in the evening, I have sent for my wife." "I am so glad," said the lady. "Mr. Wow," turning to her niece, "has not seen his wife for 7 years. "Dearie me," exclaimed the young girl. "What a lot of letters you must have written." "I have not written her one," returned the young man somewhat stiffly. Ada Charlton looked up in surprise. "Why," she began. "Mr. Wow used to be such a studious boy when I first knew him," interrupted Mrs. Dean, laying her hand affectionately upon the young man's shoulder. "Now, it is all business. But you won't forget the concert on Saturday evening?" "No, I will not forget," answered Wow Sankwei. "He has never written to his wife," explained Mrs. Dean when she and her niece were alone, "because his wife can neither read nor write." "Oh, isn't that sad?" murmured Ada Charlton, her own winsome face becoming pensive. "They don't seem to think so. It is the Chinese custom to educate only the boys. At least it has been so in the past. Sankwei himself is unusually bright. Poor boy. He began life here as a laundryman, and you may be sure that it must have been hard on him, for, as the son of a petty Chinese government official, he had not been accustomed to manual labor. But Chinese character is wonderful, and now after 7 years in this country, he enjoys a reputation as a businessman amongst his countrymen, and is as up-to-date as any young American. But, Auntie, isn't it dreadful to think that a man should live away from his wife for so many years without any communication between them whatsoever except through others? It is dreadful to our minds, but not to theirs. Everything with them is a matter of duty. Sankwei married his wife as a matter of duty. He sends for her as a matter of duty. I wonder if it is all duty on her side," mused the girl. Mrs. Dean smiled. "You are too romantic, Ada," said she. "I hope, however, that when she does come, they will be happy together. I think almost as much of Sankwei as I do of my own boy." 3. Pao Lin, the wife of Wow Sankwei, sat in a corner of the deck of the big steamer, awaiting the coming of her husband. Beside her, leaning his little cute head against her shoulder, stood her 6-year-old son. He had been ailing throughout the voyage, and his small face was pinched with pain. His mother, who had been nursing him every night since the ship had left port, appeared very worn and tired. This, despite the fact that with a feminine desire to make herself fair to see in the eyes of her husband, she had arrayed herself in a heavily embroidered purple costume, whitened her forehead and cheeks with powder, and tinted her lips with carmine. He came at last, looking over and beyond her, there were 2 others of her countrywomen awaiting the men who would send for them, and each had a child, so that for a moment he seemed somewhat bewildered. Only when the ship's officer pointed out and named her did he know her as his. Then he came forward, spoke a few words of formal welcome, and, lifting the child in his arms, began questioning her as to its health. She answered in low monosyllables. At his greeting she had raised her patient eyes to his face, the face of the husband whom she had not seen for 7 long years, then the eager look of expectancy which had crossed her own faded away, her eyelids drooped, and her countenance assumed an almost sullen expression. "Ah, poor Sanquay," exclaimed Mrs. Dean, who with Ada Charlton stood some little distance apart from the family group. "Poor wife," murmured the young girl. She moved forward and would have taken in her own white hands the ringed ones of the Chinese woman, but the young man gently restrained her. "She cannot understand you," said he. As the young girl fell back, he explained to his wife the presence of the stranger women. They were there to bid her welcome, they were kind and good and wished to be her friends as well as his. Pao Lin looked away. Ada Charlton's bright face, and the tone in her husband's voice when he spoke to the young girl, aroused a suspicion in her mind, a suspicion natural to one who had come from a land where friendship between a man and woman is almost unknown. "Poor little thing! How shy she is," exclaimed Mrs. Dean. Sanquay was glad that neither she nor the young girl understood the meaning of the averted face. Thus began Weil Sanquay's life in America as a family man. He soon became accustomed to the change, which was not such a great one after all. Pao Lin was more of an accessory than a part of his life. She interfered not at all with his studies, his business, or his friends, and when not engaged in housework or sewing, spent most of her time in the society of one or the other of the merchants' wives who lived in the flats and apartments around her own. She kept up the Chinese custom of taking her meals after her husband or at a separate table, and observed faithfully the rule laid down for her by her late mother-in-law, to keep a quiet tongue in the presence of her man. Sanquay, on his part, was always kind and indulgent. He bought her silk dresses, hair ornaments, fans, and sweetmeats. He ordered her favorite dishes from the Chinese restaurant. When she wished to go out with her women friends, he hired a carriage, and shortly after her advent erected behind her sleeping room a chapel for the ancestral tablet and gorgeous goddess which she had brought overseas with her. Upon the child both parents lavished affection. He was a quaint, serious little fellow, small for his age and requiring much care. Although naturally much attached to his mother, he became also very fond of his father who, more like an elder brother than a parent, delighted in playing all kinds of games with him, and whom he followed about like a little dog. Ada Charlton took a great fancy to him and sketched him in many different poses for a book on Chinese children which she was illustrating. "He will be strong enough to go to school next year," said Sanquay to her one day. "Later on I intend to put him through an American college." "What does your wife think of a Western training for him?" inquired the young girl. "I have not consulted her about the matter," he answered. "A woman does not understand such things." "A woman, Mr. Weil," declared Ada, "understands such things as well as and sometimes better than a man." "An American woman, maybe," amended Sanquay, "but not a Chinese." From the first Pao Lin had shown no disposition to become Americanized, and Sanquay himself had not urged it. "I do appreciate the advantages of becoming westernized," said he to Mrs. Dean, whose influence and interest in his studies in America had helped him to become what he was, "but it is not as if she had come here as I came, in her learning days. The time for learning with her is over." One evening, upon returning from his store, he found the little yen sobbing pitifully. "What," he teased, "a man and weeping?" The boy tried to hide his face, and as he did so, the father noticed that his little hand was red and swollen. He strode into the kitchen where Pao Lin was preparing the evening meal. The little child who was not strong, is there anything he could do to merit the infliction of pain? He questioned. Pao Lin faced her husband. Yes, I think so, said she. What? I forbade him to speak the language of the white women, and he disobeyed me. He had words in that tongue with the white boy from the next street. Sankwei was astounded. We are living in the white man's country, said he. The child will have to learn the white man's language. Not my child, answered Pao Lin. Sankwei turned away from her. Come, little one, said he to his son, we will take supper tonight at the restaurant, and afterwards Yen shall see a show. Pao Lin laid down the dish of vegetables which she was straining and took from a hook a small wrap which she adjusted around the boy. Now go with thy father, said she sternly. But the boy clung to her, to the hand which had punished him. I will sup with you, he cried, I will sup with you. Go, repeated his mother, pushing him from her. And as the two passed over the threshold, she called to the father, keep the wrap around the child. The night air is chill. Late that night, while father and son were peacefully sleeping, the wife and mother arose, and lifting gently the unconscious boy, bore him into the next room where she sat down with him in a rocker. Waking, he clasped his arms around her neck. Backwards and forwards she rocked him, passionately caressing the wounded hand and crooning and crying until he fell asleep again. The first chastisement that the son of Wao Sankwei had received from his mother was because he had striven to follow in the footsteps of his father and use the language of the stranger. You did perfectly right, said old Xin Tao the following morning, as she leaned over her balcony to speak to the wife of Wao Sankwei. Had I again a son to rear, I should see to it that he followed not after the white people. Xin Tao's son had married a white woman, and his children passed their grandname on the street without recognition. In this country, she is most happy who has no child, said La Chu, resting her elbow upon the shoulder of Xin Tao. A toy, the young daughter of Lu Wing, is as bold and free in her ways as are the white women, and her name is on all the men's tongues. What prudent man of our race would take her as wife? One needs not to be born here to be made a fool of, joined in Pao Lin, appearing at another balcony door. Think of Hua. From sunrise till midnight he worked for 14 years, then a white man came along and persuaded from him every dollar, promising to return doublefold within the moon. Many moons have risen and waned, and Hua still waits on this side of the sea for the white man and his money. Meanwhile, his father and mother, who looked long for his coming, have passed beyond returning. The new religion, what trouble it brings, exclaimed La Chu. My man received word yestereve that the good old mother of Chi Ping, he who was baptized a Christian at the last baptizing in the mission around the corner, had her head secretly severed from her body by the steadfast people of the village, as soon as the news reached there. 'Twas the first violent death in the records of the place. This happened to the mother of one of the boys attending the mission corner of my street. No doubt, the poor old mother, having lost face, minded not so much the losing of her head, sighed Pao Lin. She gazed below her curiously. The American Chinatown held a strange fascination for the girl from the seacoast village. Streaming along the street was a motley throng made up of all nationalities. The sing-song voices of girls whom respectable merchants' wives shudder to name, were calling to one another from high balconies up shadowy alleys. A fat barber was laughing hilariously at a drunken white man who had fallen into a gutter. A withered old fellow, carrying a bird in a cage, stood at the corner entreating passers-by to have a good fortune told. Some children were burning punk on the curbstone. There went by a stalwart chief of the 6 companies engaged in earnest confab with a yellow-robed priest from the Joss house. A Chinese dressed in the latest American style and a very blonde woman, laughing immoderately, were entering a Chinese restaurant together. Above all the hubbub of voices was heard the clang of electric cars and the jarring of heavy wheels over cobblestones. Pao Lin raised her head and looked her thoughts at the old woman, Xin Tao. Yes, nodded the dame, 'tis a mad place in which to bring up a child. Pao Lin went back into the house, gave little Yin his noonday meal, and dressed him with care. His father was to take him out that afternoon. She questioned the boy, as she braided his queue, concerning the white women whom he visited with his father. It was evening when they returned, while Sankwei and his boy. The little fellow ran up to her in high glee. "See, mother," said he, pulling off his cap, "I am like father now. I wear no queue." The mother looked down upon him at the little round head from which the queue, which had been her pride, no longer dangled. "Ah," she cried. "I am ashamed of you, I am ashamed." The boy stared at her, hurt and disappointed. "Never mind, son," comforted his father. "It is all right." Pao Lin placed the bowls of seaweed and chicken's liver before them and went back to the kitchen where her own meal was waiting. But she did not eat. She was saying within herself, "It is for the white woman he has done this, it is for the white woman." Later, as she laid the queue of her son within the trunk wherein lay that of his father, long since cast aside, she discovered a picture of Mrs. Dean, taken when the American woman had first become the teacher and benefactress of the youthful laundryman. She ran over with it to her husband. "Here," said she, "it is a picture of one of your white friends." Sankwei took it from her almost reverently. "That woman," he explained, "has been to me as a mother." "And the young woman, the one with eyes the color of blue china, is she also as a mother?" inquired Pao Lin gently. But for all her gentleness, while Sankwei flushed angrily. "Never speak of her," he cried. "Never speak of her." "Ha, ha, ha. Ha, ha, ha," laughed Pao Lin. It was a soft and not unmelodious laugh, but to Wao Sankwei it sounded almost sacrilegious. Nevertheless, he soon calmed down. Pao Lin was his wife, and to be kind to her was not only his duty but his nature. So when his little boy climbed into his lap and besought his father to pipe him a tune, he reached for his flute and called to Pao Lin to put aside work for that night. He would play her some Chinese music. And Pao Lin, whose heart and mind, undiverted by change, had been concentrated upon Wao Sankwei ever since the day she had become his wife, smothered, for the time being, the bitterness in her heart, and succumbed to the magic of her husband's playing, a magic which transported her in thought to the old Chinese days whose impression and influence ever remain with the exiled sons and daughters of China. 4. That a man should take to himself 2 wives, or even 3, if he thought proper, seemed natural and right in the eyes of Wao Pao Lin. She herself had come from a home where there were 2 broods of children and where her mother and her father's other wife had eaten their meals together as sisters. In that home there had not always been peace, but each woman, at least, had the satisfaction of knowing that her man did not regard or treat the other woman as her superior. To each had fallen the common lot to bear children to the man, and the man was master of all. But, oh! The humiliation and shame of bearing children to a man who looked up to another woman and a woman of another race as a being above the common uses of women. There is a jealousy of the mind more poignant than any mere animal jealousy. When Wao Sankwei's second child was 2 weeks old, Ada Charlton and her aunt called to see the little one, and the young girl chatted brightly with the father and played merrily with Yan, who was growing strong and merry. The American women could not, of course, converse with the Chinese, but Ada placed beside her a bunch of beautiful flowers, pressed her hand, and looked down upon her with radiant eyes. Secure in the difference of race, in the love of many friends, and in the happiness of her chosen work, no suspicion whatever crossed her mind that the woman whose husband was her aunt's protégé tasted everything bitter because of her. After the visitors had gone, Pauline, who had been watching her husband's face while the young artist was in the room, said to him, "She can be happy who takes all and gives nothing." "Takes all and gives nothing," echoed her husband. "What do you mean?" "She has taken all your heart," answered Pauline, "but she has not given you a son. It is I who have had that task." "You are my wife," answered Wao Sankwei. "And she, oh! How can you speak of her so? She, who was as a pure waterflower, a lily." He went out of the room, carrying with him a little painting of their boy, which Ada Charlton had given to him as she bade him goodbye and which he had intended showing with pride to the mother. It was on the day that the baby died that Pauline first saw the little picture. It had fallen out of her husband's coat pocket when he lifted the tiny form in his arms and declared it lifeless. Even in that first moment of loss, Pauline, stooping to pick up the portrait, had shrunk back in horror, crying, "She would cast a spell! She would cast a spell!" She set her heel upon the face of the picture and destroyed it beyond restoration. "You know not what you say and do," sternly rebuked Sankwei. He would have added more, but the mystery of the dead child's look forbade him. "The loss of a son is as the loss of a limb," said he to his childless partner, as under the red glare of the lanterns they sat discussing the sad event. "But you are not without consolation," returned Liang Sao. "Your firstborn grows in strength and beauty." "True," assented Wao Sankwei, his heavy thoughts becoming lighter. And Pauline, in her curtained balcony overhead, drew closer her child and passionately cried, "Sooner would I, O heart of my heart, that the light of thine eyes were also quenched, than that thou shouldst be contaminated with the wisdom of the new." V.